Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to show you a book that I have. The name of the book is Urtidsbilder, which translates into Prehistoric Pictures. The book is illustrated by one of my favorite artists, Stålenhag, whose most well-known works would be Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood. And this book is written by Davour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip through the book and show you the pictures, and I'm going to talk about all the animals and what's happening in them, and I'm also going to read some of the texts that come with it. And I feel I should throw out a little warning since this is a book about nature and all that comes with that. It can sometimes get a bit violent and sometimes scary. So if you're sensitive to those sort of things, then maybe you should skip this one. But if you like me, if you really like the Earth's prehistory and paleontology and dinosaurs and all the things related, then I think it will be worth it in the end to stick around. So let's get started. On the cover of the book is a very well-known creature known as Dimetrodon, standing on a cliff, watching over the Permian landscape. And the first 2 pages are all in my favorite color, which is orange. And here's the title again, Urtidsbilder. In the first chapter, the name of it is Urtidens djup, which translates into the depth of prehistory. And it's only fitting that the book starts off at the beginning of Earth's history, when the Earth was much warmer and much wilder than it is today. The Earth was created from collisions, from smaller asteroid-like space rocks. But eventually the astral bombardment would stop and the Earth crust would get time to cool and harden into a hard shell around a warm core. Now, among these space rocks from the cooler outer edges of the solar system, there were also comets that they were filled with water and frozen gases. And this water and those gases, they would eventually accumulate into a thin layer around the Earth's crust. And above that, the atmosphere was formed. Here it says följeslagaren, which means the companion. And it's the moon. Now, when the moon would rise above the first life forms on Earth, it was actually much closer to the Earth than it is today, and therefore would have appeared much bigger in the sky. And the moon, it was formed from debris from when a planet of the size of Mars called Theia collided with the Earth. And the moon always remained dry and barren and lifeless, but in many ways it still contributed to life on Earth. For example, by reflecting the sunlight, the light that comes down from the moon would help guiding the little creatures in the oceans during the night. And since its creation, the moon it's also been drifting away, moved away from the Earth. And with that, it have taken some of the Earth's gravity with it. And that had made it so that the Earth would tilt a bit. And from that, we have tidal water, which means that there would be places where water and land would take turns to dominate in those places. And it could be that in those spots where it was both land and water, some creatures could slowly crawl up on it and adapt and find ways to eventually live on land. The name of the next chapter is Över vattnet, which means out of the water. And I love these underwater pictures. This creature is known as an ammonite. And the ammonites, they were cephalopods, like squid and like an octopus. And the ammonites, they would mostly swim around in the ocean trying to grab plankton and other small animals with its tentacles. And perhaps like modern squid and octopi, they might have been able to spray out some black inky substance to confuse predators. Now the ammonites, it's a group of animals. They existed for a very long time, more than 300 million years, eventually going extinct 66 million years ago, the same time as the dinosaurs disappeared. And with that, there were many, many species of ammonite, and they came in many sizes, from the smallest one to about as big as a fingernail, to the largest ones where this shell will grow to big as a tractor wheel. This guy is known as Ariops. And Ariops is an amphibian, like a frog animal of the order Semnosponduli. And she lived about 300 million years ago during the Permian period. And the water surface was no limit for Ariops, as she would have been able to feel right at home both on land and in the water. But it's unlikely that she would have been able to run very fast with these short legs. And she was probably not a very fast and agile swimmer either. We think that she would mostly be lurking just below the surface, like in this picture, with only her eyes sticking above it, waiting for some careless creature to come a little bit too close. And then she would quickly open her mouth and catch it with her many small teeth. During the period when Ariops lived, there were many amphibian creatures like her that would have been able to come out of the water and up on land. But with her 2 meters in length, Ariops was by far the largest one of her time. Here's the creature from the book cover again. It's Dimetrodon. And if you played with plastic dinosaurs when you were little, chances are that you had this guy. But in fact, Dimetrodon, he was no dinosaur. Dimetrodon, he belongs to a group of animals that are known as pelycosaurs, that had these sort of mammalian traits about them. And the pelycosaurs eventually evolved into a group of animals known as therapsids. And it was the therapsids that eventually evolved into mammals. So that makes it so that Dimetrodon, he was more closely related to mammals like you and me, more than he was related to a dinosaur. And this scene is taking place about 295 to 270 million years ago during the Permian period. And Dimetrodon, who would grow to about 4.5 meters in length, making him the largest predator of his environment in his time. Here's a little creature known as Robertia. And Robertia belonged to a group of animals known as Dicynodons of the order Therapsidae. Now, Dicynodonts, they were herbivores that all had this distinctive tusks, a pair of tusks in its mouth that they probably used to dig up roots in the ground. And the Dicynodonts, they were among the most successful non-mammalian therapsids of the Permian period. And they came in many sizes. Most of them looked like this, with their pair of tusks. The smallest one was Robertia, about the size of a mouse, whereas the largest one would grow to the size of a rhinoceros. Here's a very mysterious scene. A pair of Bradysauruses wandering around in this sort of wet foresty area, maybe looking for soft plant to eat. And during this time, about 260 million years ago, during the Permian period, it was, along with the large Dicynodonts, Bradysaurus was, with its 3 meters in length, among the largest herbivores of its time. And the Bradysaurus, its body was covered with hard and thick scales that with later species would grow even thicker in its descendants. And Bradysaurus, he belongs to a group of animals known as Prehistoric. That in this group of animals, they might be related to turtles. Here's a rainy day. And the animal in this picture is known as Lycaenops. Lycaenops, he's a gorgonopsid. A gorgonopsid from the group of Therapsidae. And the gorgonopsids, they were the most successful predators of their environments that only grew larger as time passed, while Lycaenops lived about 270 to 250 million years ago. He was about 1 meter in length, but there were gorgonopsids that grow to the size of bears. I think the gorgonopsids are very interesting, look very bizarre. It's hard to determine whatever he looks more reptilian or more mammalian. And I love the energy in this picture. It might be hard to see from the camera, but it's very windy and very rainy. And perhaps this Lycaenops is waiting for the wind to blow over and the rain to stop. In this next chapter, the name of it is Kontinents på irrvägar, which means, I would translate it to Lost Continent. The creature on this picture is known as Garothorax. Garothorax. And he's an amphibian from the order of Temnospondyli, like Eriops earlier. And the Garothorax, would hide in the mud at the bottom of a lake or a river or some other body of water, with its mouth open, waiting for something to swim by, and a curious creature looking into this. And then its mouth would shut like a lid, and then it would have a snack. In Urtidsbilder, it's hard to see, but they have a very bizarre look to them, as adults kept their gills that they had as a tadpole. So the tadpoles would have gills that in most amphibians get lost in development, but then Urtidsbilder would keep them. Now, in the place where Urtidsbilder lived, he must have felt very at home, since the species was left mostly unchanged for about 35 million years. And he existed from about 235 to 200 million years ago, during the Triassic period. In Urtidsbilder, he would grow to about 1 meter in length. And here is another lovely underwater picture. And this one in particular I really like. I like how the light source is breaking the surface of the water, coming down like rays. And also that this sort of log or fallen tree is on the bottom. And this creature, he's known as Mastodonsaurus. And he's an amphibian too, also from the order Temnosponduli. And it's hard to imagine how this creature would have been able to move on land, as his head, his enormous head, is about the third of his body. And in this picture it looks like he's chasing another one of a smaller Mastodonsaurus. So maybe he was a cannibal. Or perhaps this is some other species of Temnosponduli. And with his 6 meters in length, Mastodonsaurus is the largest amphibian that have ever been discovered. In this picture is a turtle known as Prochinochelys, watching over the desert-like areas of central Pangaea about 210 million years ago during the Triassic period. It was during the Triassic period when many new types of reptiles appeared, like dinosaurs and also turtles. And Prochinochelys, he was among the first turtles that had a complete shell around its body, both on its back and on the underside. But Prochinochelys, he wouldn't have been able to retract his head into his shell like modern turtles do. Instead, his neck was protected by hard scales and spikes. This is a pair of plateosauruses. And Plateosaurus was among the first dinosaurs that appeared on the Earth about 215 million years ago. And Plateosaurus is also among the most well-described dinosaurs. And we have. And the Plateosaurus would grow to between 5 to 10 meters. And that is big for his time. But it's not very big in comparison to some other giants that will later appear during the age of the dinosaurs. However, 5 to 10 meters in length, that's still quite enormous if you compare it to any animal you would find today. I have to stop and think about that sometimes. It was during this time, during the Triassic, when the supercontinent of Pangaea started to separate. And with that, new environments were formed, and in those new environments also there were many new life forms that could evolve. This next chapter is called Monster ur en försvunnen värld, which translates into monsters from a lost world. And this creature is Ichthyosaurus. And you might think that it looks like a fish, or a shark, or a dolphin. But Ichthyosaurus, it's hard to say. Ichthyosaurus was a reptile. And Ichthyosaurus was discovered in 1811 by Mary Anning, or rather, was her brother Joseph that found it. He found this very strange head that looked like, almost like the head of a crocodile. But Mary Anning, who was 12 years old at the time, she was determined to find the rest of the body, and after a couple of months of searching, she finally found it. And it was a very strange body, because it was very reminiscent of a reptile, but it had these like flipper-like limbs. Very strange. Like a fish body, but it's a reptile. How strange. And the species of Ichthyosaurus, which I think means fish lizard, it existed about 208 to 140 million years ago. And they also came in many sizes, the group of animals known as Ichthyosaur, that is. These species will grow to 2 meters in length, whereas the largest Ichthyosaur that have been discovered, Shastosaurus, will grow to 20 meters in length. In this picture, it's a very beautiful creature known as Plesiosaurus. You might think that Plesiosaurus looks like sort of a sauropod, that being the long-necked dinosaurs. A sauropod, but with flippers. But Plesiosaurus was not a dinosaur. A Plesiosaurus, it was a plesiosaur. It's another group of animals that were fully marine. And Plesiosaurus was also discovered by Mary Anning in, I can't remember the year, but when it was discovered, the scientists were absolutely baffled by this impossible creature. But Mary Anning, being so young, was very well respected by scientific elite, and the discovery of Plesiosaurus became sort of a breakthrough as a fossil hunter. And these guys, they're known as Dimorphodon. And Dimorphodon, they were also discovered by Mary Anning. However, she only found the body. And when the head was eventually found, it was after she passed away, so she never got to know that she had discovered yet another new species of another animal. Now, Dimorphodon is a pterosaur. And pterosaurs, they are not flying dinosaurs. Well, pterosaurs are pterosaurs. So there are dinosaurs on land, and then there are plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs in the water, and then there are pterosaurs in the sky. The name of the next chapter is Skymningsvarelser, which means creatures of the twilight. During the night, in the age of the dinosaurs, a small animal known as Morganusidon would go out, protected by the shadows of the vegetation and the darkness of the night, looking for beetles or other insects. And in her den, a clutch of newly hatched babies was waiting for her to give them milk. You see, Morganusidon was a mammal. And it was during the age of the dinosaurs when mammals developed many of the traits that we see in them today. And it's tempting to think about it like during this time that small mammals like this mouse-sized Morganusidon was biding their time, hiding in the shadows, waiting for their turn to take over the world after the dinosaurs. However, it's not really like that. That evolution doesn't work like that. No, mammals, like us, we are not the end goal of evolution. We are not some shape or some form that life wants to reach. No, we are simply descendants of creatures that were lucky enough to endure and survive the hard times. This is also a mammal, known as Rhipinomammus. Look kind of like a badger or some dog creature. And Rhipinomammus was actually quite large of an animal. I mean, for mammals that lived during the age of the dinosaurs, whereas most mammals were very small, like Morganucedon, small mouse-sized creature. Rhipinomammus was about 1 meter in length, and we know that it was a dinosaur killer, since we have found remains of a baby Psittacosaurus and its fossilized insides in the area where Rhipinomammus lived during what is now China. There weren't many large dinosaurs around, and that would have given it space and opportunity to grow quite large and fierce. This next chapter, the name of it is Written in Stone. And this is one of my favorite pictures in the book. It's of a creature known as Archaeopteryx. And Archaeopteryx was the first dinosaur discovered with clear traces of fossilized feathers. And with this discovery we figure out that the birds, this is where they came from, the dinosaurs. And I love this. I think it's like when I'm outside and I see the crows hopping about on the ground. And it's like, it's how I imagine it would look like if Archaeopteryx was on the ground hopping about and then climbing up the tree trunk. It's unclear if Archaeopteryx was actually very good at flying, so I think that it was actually a better climber, and then it would climb up the tree and then up on some branch, and then it would leap and stretch its arms out and then glide through the air. Now, the full name of this animal is Archaeopteryx lithographica, and it comes from an old technique for printing texts and pictures known as lithography. Is when you take two old chalk stones and press them together. But in these old chalk stones there were sometimes far older printed remains of old life forms like fish, sometimes a shrimp, and sometimes even animals that would have fallen from the sky, like insects and flying reptiles, and then of course the old wing, Archaeopteryx. And the word lithography comes from the Greek words for stone and write. So Archaeopteryx lithographica translates into the old wing written in stone. Here's another pterosaur known as Rhamphorhynchus that will grow to about 1 meter in length and perhaps about 1.5 meters in between the tip of its wings. And in its beak it had these needle-like sharp teeth that would have been excellent to hold on to slippery fish as it dove down towards the water surface, looking for something to catch. As Rhamphorhynchus would fly over the water over this sort of bay area 150 million years ago, this animal, this dinosaur known as Compsognathus, would scurry along the beach trying to catch a lizard. And Compsognathus was not a very large dinosaur. It was about 1 meter in length. But she could still impress. And scientists had made digital reconstruction models sort of from her skeleton and determined that she would have been able to dart away at about 60 kilometers an hour, easily outrunning this little lizard that she preyed upon. This chapter, name of it is Klor och fjädrar. Translates into claws and feathers. And here we are back in the Triassic period. This pair of coelophyses watching over it. And coelophyses was among the early dinosaurs, appearing about 200 million years ago. I love this. Might be hard to see, but this red sort of stripe that goes along your neck. I think it would have been animals like coelophyses that would eventually evolve into animals like Archaeopteryx. He tried to climb the trees and then eventually growing feathers on his arms that he could use to glide through the air. And this is a very dramatic scene. It's a pair of chunking saurs defending themselves against this large predator known as Yangchuangsaurus. Yangchuangsaurus was a very impressive predator, in about 10 meters in length, although not as large, about 4 to 5 meters in length. Yangchuangsaurus wouldn't have a lot of reason to feel confident in between these two guys. Now, Chunkingosaurus, being a stegosaur, has this very distinctive and iconic profile with these plates running along its back, ending in spikes on its tail, known as a thagomizer. Scientists have been wondering for 100 years what these plates on its back was used for. Were they for protection against some predator trying to chomp down on its back? Were they for display? For communication? Or were they some heat circulatory system? We don't quite know. But I think it's pretty clear what the spikes on its tail, what the thagomizer was used for. In this picture is a very famous dinosaur known as Iguanodon. And Iguanodon was among the first dinosaurs named and described. Iguanodon was only the second when it was named in 1825 by Gideon Mantell. And Gideon Mantell was also tasked with building a life-size reconstruction of the creature. But at the time, we didn't have a head. And also it's a bit hard to see, but Iguanodon on its hands has these sort of thumb spikes. Its thumb is like a spike, like a claw. And we only had one. So Mantell thought that this thumb spike was a horn. So he put it on the head, or what he thought the head would have looked like of the animal. And the result is actually quite funny to look at, or today at least. But it's understandable too that they made some mistakes, because we didn't have a lot of reference with the dinosaurs, as we only had two. And also the term paleontology, I mean the science of prehistoric life, had only been spoken for the first time in 1822, only 3 years before the naming of Iguanodon, and also when the term dinosaur was spoken for the first time. So that's how young the field was. So it's understandable that some mistakes were made. But it's very interesting to see sort of the evolution of how we thought dinosaurs looked like with Iguanodon. And now how our view of animals developed with more discoveries. On this page is an animal known as Psittacosaurus, or the parrot lizard, because it looks kind of parrot-like with its beak. And coloration in dinosaurs, it is mostly unknown since pigmentation are exceedingly rare. It's very rare to find traces of pigments in fossils, but Psittacosaurus is one of those rare cases where we've actually found traces of it in the fossils. And Psittacosaurus, along its tail, had this elegant frill made out of bristle-like feathers, whereas the rest of the body was covered in scales. That we know from the fossils, that it was darker on its back and brighter on its underside. And this sort of pattern is carried by animals that wants to stay mostly hidden in the landscape, as it evens out the effects of sunlight from above and the shadows from below. So we think that the environments where Psittacosaurus lived would have been that they would have been preferring this sort of landscape. Here's a very famous dinosaur. It's Velociraptor. And Velociraptor, it would be, the Velociraptor was running on two on his toes, whereas the third one was sort of a retractable sickle-like claw that he probably would have used to sort of stab at and grab onto animals that it preyed upon. And we think that Velociraptor would have mostly been hunting animals smaller than than themselves, and the velociraptor being about 1 meter in length and about maybe standing 1 meter tall. But we know that at least once there was a velociraptor that they came into combat with another animal of the same size, as we have found fossilized remains of a velociraptor with its toe claw in the neck of a dinosaur known as Protoceratops, a horned dinosaur, where the Psittacosaurus in turn had the arm of the velociraptor in its beak-like mouth. And in this struggle they must have caused a sandslide or something and got buried. And then they fossilized together in this dramatic scene. This chapter, name of it is Vingar, and it translates into wings. This animal is a very famous pterosaur known as Pteranodon. And Pteranodon would have been a very elegant flyer. Been able to ride the wings long distances without flapping its wings and glide above the water surface looking for fish to catch in its toothless beak. Now Pteranodon is actually, it is the most well recognized of the pterosaurs that we have, since we have so many fossils of them. And pterosaurs, they were the first flying vertebrates, the first vertebrates to take to the skies. But at the time of Pteranodon, he would have been sharing the space with a new type of creature known as the birds. Although at this time the birds weren't very large, certainly not next to Pteranodon. But it seems that wings, it's like it's something that nature invented twice at the same time in two different groups of animals, independently. And this is known as convergent evolution. And another example of that is, if you remember earlier when I showed you the ichthyosaur, the fish lizard, that it sort of looked like a dolphin or like a fish or a shark. I feel like that it looks like it's a shape that life in the water wants to have, since animals have developed like that in three different groups of animals independently of each other. I'm not quite sure in this case, but I think that's also an example of convergent evolution. I think that is really interesting. A Pteranodon, with his 6 meters in between the tip of its wings, he is for sure at the top of among the largest of the pterosaurs, but still he is only half the size of the largest one, of the largest creature that ever flew the skies. Unfortunately, that creature isn't in this book. Here's an animal known as Hesperornis. And they look very similar to like a modern sort of water bird. Although he lived in the same age of Pteranodon, about 80 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. And this water bird didn't have wings, really. Its arms were more flipper-like. So this bird was for sure. And a water bird, perhaps more suited to swimming, maybe diving down underwater and catching fish, like this one. Also, one difference between the modern birds and this one is that Hesperornis had teeth in its beak. And also, it was also about the size of a adult human. Another bird that lived alongside Pteranodon is this one, Ichthyornis. I think Ichthyornis, it looks very much like some bird, like a bird would look today, although he has also teeth in its beak. And also he has this bony tail. And it was like when the early fossil hunter Othniel Charles Marsh found the remains of Ichthyornis, no one had seen birds with teeth before. Or birds with these sort of reptilian traits still in them. And birds like this, like Ichthyornis, it gave clues to how birds and reptiles were connected, and Charles Darwin himself praised Marsh for his work with these early birds, as it lent important support to the theory of evolution. This next chapter, name of it is Nya födelser, which translates into new births. And this is my favorite dinosaur. And this is a group of an animal known as Maiasaura. And Maiasaura belongs to a group of dinosaurs known as hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, named after the distinctive shape of their mouth that looks sort of a duck bill. And I love this picture, and I love the sort of this artistic liberties that the artists have taken with the coloration and the pattern of the animal. And because Maiasaura, it didn't have a lot of sort of natural, like protection. It didn't have any defensive claws or anything like that. No hard scales on its body to protect itself against predators. So it would have most likely sought out protection in the group. And perhaps like the zebras today have stripes that in a large group would confuse predators. Maybe animals like Maiasaura would have something similar going on. And it is with these sort of artistic liberties that you can take with the dinosaurs, since we don't know, and we will probably never know how they really look like. And so when someone imagines a dinosaur in the world they lived in, it is all in their individual minds. So no one's world is the same, and no one's dinosaur looks the same. So when you imagine this world, that world is yours. And it's yours alone, and you can do whatever you want with it, and everything can look like exactly like you want, because we will never really know. And that is why I love dinosaurs so much, and the world around them. Now why Maiasaura is my favorite dinosaur is because before it was discovered, we mostly thought about dinosaurs like terrible monsters that would lay their egg and then just abandon it and then perhaps try to eat it later, eat the baby. But when Maiasaura was discovered, it was discovered in large groups of individuals in all ages, adults and young adults, juveniles and babies, and also eggs that laid like in nests, with also traces of chewed up vegetation that the parents had brought. And from that, the view of dinosaurs, it shifted from these terrible monsters into a more animal that are more caring, more parental, making the dinosaur more like a real animal, much more relatable. And Maiasaura was a herbivore. He lived about 77 million years ago during the Cretaceous period, and an adult would grow to 9 meters in length. Still not very large compared to other giants. But if you just stop for a second and imagine a 9-meter long creature walking outside the window, walking past you, it's massive. I think it's just incredible. I mean, today there's nothing like that, and that is also just incredible to think about, I think. In this picture, it's quite scary. Imagine being this group of ornithomimus walking through the forest, then coming out to this sort of open, this glade. And then you see it, the 12-meter long monster that is Tyrannosaurus, chomping down on some animal that it might have brought down earlier. These ornithomimus, about 3 meters in length, would be cautiously be walking in the edge of this foresty area, and would have had a close eye on the beast in the middle of it. But Tyrannosaurus, this one, he wouldn't have a lot of reason to go chasing after these small ostrich-like creatures, since he is busy with his meal from a far larger animal than the ornithomimus, and Tyrannosaurus wouldn't want to spend an energy but I'm sure if he wanted a snack sometime, then he would have for sure been chasing these little guys. We think that Tyrannosaurus, since we have found in relatives to Tyrannosaurus, we have found traces of feathers. So we think that might have been the case of Tyrannosaurus too. Perhaps that as a chick, when the baby Tyrannosaurus hatched from the egg, that maybe it was covered with this sort of chicken-like feathers. And then as it grew older, it would eventually lose it more and more feathers until it was fully grown, where it would only have feathers sort of along its neck or just small parts of its body, as the body size alone would be enough to regulate its temperature, keeping it warm. And some of the most frightening things you can imagine, isn't it? This enormous beast, 12 meters in length. And it is unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, that we now leave the age of the dinosaurs. as they went extinct 66 million years ago. This last chapter, Jordens nya jättar, translates into the new giants of the earth. Now we're in a Paleogene period, about 45 million years ago. I'm walking through this sort of swampy landscape, very mysterious. It's an animal known as Urtidsbilder. Urtidsbilder had 3 pairs of these sort of weird-looking horns on its head. That perhaps they were ornamental, or perhaps they were used for close combat. Urtidsbilder also had these saber-like teeth in its mouth, and we're not quite sure what they were used for. If they were used to dig up roots, maybe, but the rest of its teeth were rather small, and not suited for chewing on hard plant matter. Now you might think that Urtidsbilder looks kind of a rhinoceros, but Urtidsbilder belongs to a group of animals known as dinosaurs. And this group of mammal, they went extinct before the appearance of the animals that would eventually evolve into the rhinoceros. Here's another underwater picture. And then it depicts a creature known as Davour that lived about 40 million years ago during the Paleogene. And Davour belongs to a group of animals known as Cetacea, that being whales. Davour is a whale, and he is among the first fully marine whales, since whales are actually, they evolved from a sort of a hoofed mammal that adapted to life in water and eventually losing its feet, and that would be replaced by this flipper-like forelimbs. And being about 5 meters in length, I think Davour actually looks quite, it's terrifying to imagine this animal, but it's actually, Davour was actually prey to a much larger creature, 4 times its length. And this creature is known as Basilosaurus, who was a whale like Davour, but as I said, much larger. Now this creature, walking along the water's edge, probably didn't think about his lost cousins that took to the water and found ways to live there. And this creature, Anthracotherium, he's a descendant of the same mammals that became whales. And Anthracotherium, he is probably an ancestor to the hippo. And today, hippos are the closest land-living relatives to the whales in the ocean. Now at this time, about 22 million years ago, during the Neogene, there were many types of grass that is spread over the world, creating these environments that would have looked quite similar to the environments we have today. And with that, many of the animals that appeared would also look very much like the animals we have today. This animal, Megastotherium, or Megastotherium, I'm not quite sure. It looks sort of like a dog. The difference is that he was as big as a horse, making him the largest predator in his environment. Now in this prehistoric savanna, where Megastotherium lived, there were also different kinds of apes that had come down from the trees and started living life on the ground. And this branch of ape that eventually led to us humans. It hadn't yet split from the ones that became chimpanzees. This animal might be very familiar to you. You might even have seen one. Not perhaps this one, but this is a beaver. Looks very similar to the beavers we have today. It's even chewing on some tree that looks rather reminiscent of something we could see today. Now the difference is that, first of all, its name is Castoroides, and his teeth was a bit more rounded than the chisel-like teeth that beavers have today. And also, this beaver that existed about 1.5 million years ago to maybe 10,000 years ago, it was 2 meters in length, making him the largest beaver that have ever existed. And he was even suited to life in water, like modern beavers. We're not sure if they built dams. Can't really know that, but if they did, they would probably be enormous too. On Castoroides he lived among the North American megafauna, such as animals like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats, and also a type of giant ground sloth. And it's strange that this megafauna, they all went extinct at the same time period, perhaps as it was the end of the Ice Age and as the climate grew warmer. That could have been the cause. Or, as some scientists believe, it could have also been the cause of the appearance of a new, rather invasive species. And it is with this last picture that we've finally come to the history, to the age after prehistory. It's when humanity makes its appearance for real in this world. I hope you enjoyed the look through this book with me, and that perhaps we can see each other some other time to maybe look through something else. So, have a good night or a good day. Bye.